Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the INTP personality type, often called the thinker or the logician.
Fascinating type, really.
We've got two great articles from the Spiritual Seek to guide us. Should be pretty insightful.
Definitely.
So, what exactly an INTP?
Well, INTP stands for introverted, intuitive, thinking, and perceiving. It's one of those 16 personality types from the Myers-Briggs,
Now, the MBTI,
Right.
based on Jung's work, isn't it?
Exactly. Jungian psychology and all those cognitive functions. But let's stick with the INTP for now.
Okay, so what are some, key traits?
Well, they're known for being analytical, driven by knowledge. And they think very independently.
Like more into solving a puzzle than going to a party.
Haha. Well, maybe. They definitely focus on their inner world, a world of logic and reason.
But they're not total hermits, are they?
No, not at all. They value their independence and solitude, but they can be engaging, especially when you get them talking about something that really interests them.
Our sources say INTPs are only like 1 to 5% of the population. Pretty rare.
It is. But even so, you see a lot of INTPs throughout history making these big contributions, like Albert Einstein.
Interesting. It shows that these personality types aren't about putting people into boxes. It's more about understanding different approaches to the world.
Exactly, recognizing that spectrum of human behavior, yeah.
Okay, let's talk strengths and weaknesses. The sources point out their logical, objective problem solving as a major strength.
Absolutely. They excel at analyzing information, seeing patterns and coming up with innovative solutions. They often end up in careers in science, technology, engineering, that sort of thing.
Makes sense. But what about the downsides?
Well, INTPs can sometimes come across as aloof or detached because of how much they like to introspect. And their decision-making, which is heavily based on logic, can sometimes make it hard for them to understand and respond to other people's emotional needs.
So a bit of a head versus heart conflict. How could these strengths become weaknesses?
Well, their logical approach, while a strength, can make it harder to understand those emotional nuances. This can impact their personal relationships, especially romantic ones. They might prioritize reason over emotions, and that can cause some misunderstandings.
So it's really important to remember every personality type has its own strengths, A and D weaknesses, INTPs included.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing those nuances, not labeling people, but appreciating the diversity of personality.
Now, these cognitive functions, they shape how INTPs think, right? I always find this concept a bit tricky. Could you, break it down?
Sure. So the MBTI, remember, it's based on Jungian psychology. It uses these cognitive functions to describe how we perceive and interact with the world. Each personality type has 4: dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior. And they all work together to shape our behavior and how we see things.
Okay, so what are the specific functions for an INTP?
For them, the dominant one is introverted thinking. That's what drives their analytical nature and that desire to understand those underlying principles.
And the others?
Their auxiliary is extroverted intuition, which helps them see patterns, possibilities, connections. You can see how introverted thinking and extroverted intuition together could make someone great at problem solving, but maybe not so great socially.
Interesting. So it's a good balance of logic and intuition. What about the tertiary and inferior functions?
Tertiary is introverted sensing, which is how they store and categorize information, drawing on past experiences. And finally, their inferior function, which can be a bit of an Achilles heel, is extroverted feeling.
Extroverted feeling. Seems a little odd for a type that prioritizes logic.
I know, right? But everyone has a balance of these functions. Extroverted feeling is their ability to connect emotionally with others. But because it's less developed, they might find it difficult to express their own feelings or understand the emotional needs of other people. So they might be perceived as insensitive, even though that's not their intention at all.
So even though they might not show it, it doesn't mean they don't have feelings.
Exactly. It's just a different way of processing emotions and expressing them.
This whole cognitive function thing, it's really insightful. It shows how all these functions interact to create the puzzle that is the INTP personality.
It really does. And understanding these functions can be incredibly helpful, not just for INTPs themselves, but also for people who want to understand them better.
Now, let's see how these functions play out in real life, like in careers and relationships.
Mm-hmm.
We already mentioned careers, how they're often good at science and technology. Can you expand on that?
Sure. INTPs often excel in careers that really make use of those analytical skills, their intellectual curiosity and independent thinking. They love roles where they get to solve problems, think critically, and explore new ideas. Think, scientists, engineers, computer programmers, mathematicians, even philosophers.
Makes sense. But what about relationships? We talked about how they might struggle with emotional expression, understanding the needs of others. How does that impact their personal connections?
Well, that's where it gets a bit more complicated. INTPs, they can be reserved and they prefer logic over emotion. So they might find relationships a bit challenging, but
Mm.
that doesn't mean they can't form strong bonds.
So it's about finding the right connection.
Exactly. They really value authenticity and that intellectual connection over, superficial chit-chat. They can be incredibly loyal and supportive friends to people who share the intellectual curiosity and who appreciate their unique perspective. But communication can be a bit of a hurdle because they're so logical, they might analyze situations rationally instead of responding emotionally.
And that could definitely lead to misunderstandings.
Mm.
So are INTPs doomed to be alone?
No, not at all. They might not be the most expressive partners, but they can form really deep, meaningful connections.
It sounds like open communication is key in any relationship with an INTP.
Definitely. INTPs value honesty and directness, and their partners need to understand how they communicate and be able to express their own emotional needs clearly.
So it's about finding that balance between logic and emotion, independence, and connection.
Exactly. And remember, relationships are a two-way street. It's not just about the INTP adapting, but also about their partner recognizing and valuing their unique contributions to the relationship.
It seems like understanding the INTP personality with all its complexities and nuances is really important, both for the INTPs themselves and the people around them in their personal lives and professional lives.
It really is. Recognizing that diversity in personality is what makes human interaction so interesting. It's about embracing our differences and learning from each other. That's how we build deeper connections.
It's about appreciating that tapestry of personalities and what each one brings to the table. Now let's move on to how INTPs approach knowledge and learning. Our sources describe them as these intellectual explorers who are always trying to figure out the mysteries of the universe.
And their thirst for knowledge. It's a defining characteristic, for sure.
One source describes them as living in a world of theoretical possibilities, always looking for ways to improve existing ideas. They love analysis and problem solving. They're driven by this deep desire to build knowledge and understanding. What's interesting is how both sources emphasize their skepticism and independence when it comes to learning.
Right. They don't just take information at face value.
They question everything, analyze it from different angles, and come to their own conclusions based on logic and evidence. They aren't swayed by popular opinion or emotional appeals. They want logical consistency, and they need evidence for any claims or theories.
It's like they have this built-in lie detector for anything that doesn't logically add up.
Yeah. This skeptical approach, together with their natural curiosity, makes them really good at spotting flaws in arguments, inconsistencies, and they come up with innovative solutions.
They're not passive learners, are they? They're actively engaging with the information, dissecting it, reconstructing it in a way that makes sense to them. And because of that, they often make these unique connections and see patterns that other people might miss.
No wonder they often excel in fields that require critical thinking, innovation, and a deep understanding of complex systems. Their natural inclination towards analysis and problem solving, along with their insatiable curiosity, makes them perfect for careers in science, technology, engineering, and other intellectually stimulating areas.
Absolutely. Their minds are definitely wired for that kind of work. But our sources also point out that this can lead to some challenges. They might, for example, abandon projects once they figured them out. They move on to the next challenge without, seeing things through.
It's like they climb the mountain, plant their flag, and then move on to the next peak, leaving all the practical stuff to others.
That's a good way to put it. This tendency can be a bit frustrating for people who work with them. It's important for INTPs to recognize this and find ways to stay engaged even when the initial thrill of discovery is gone.
So self-awareness and follow-through, those are key for them to really reach their full potential.
For sure. Developing those skills can help them make a more lasting impact in whatever they choose to do.
Now let's get back to social interactions and relationships. One source says INTPs are typically very shy when it comes to meeting new people. They do better in smaller groups where they can have those deep, meaningful conversations.
Yeah, big social gatherings can be draining for them. They find small talk superficial and prefer to have more intellectually stimulating discussions.
So not really the life of the party.
Not usually, but that doesn't mean they can't form close bonds. Once they find people who share their intellectual curiosity and appreciate their unique perspective, they can be very loyal and supportive friends.
Quality over quantity when it comes to their social circles.
Definitely. Authenticity and intellectual connection, those are important to them. But as both sources point out, the challenge is that they tend to prioritize logic over emotions. And that can cause some misunderstandings in relationships.
I can see that. Because they analyze everything, it might be hard for them to grasp the emotional nuances of a situation.
Exactly. Because they process information through logic and reason primarily, they might not always understand or respond to other people's emotional needs. And that can cause friction, especially in romantic relationships. Imagine if you're upset about something and your partner, instead of comforting you, starts analyzing the situation logically.
That would be so frustrating, almost like they're speaking different languages.
In a way, they are. This disconnect between logic and emotion can be a recurring theme in INTP relationships. But it's not that they don't have empathy, it's just that their natural inclination is to approach things rationally.
So it's about bridging that gap between logic and emotion. How can INTPs and their partners do that?
Well, INTPs can work on their emotional intelligence, and their partners can learn to appreciate that logical approach and communicate their emotional needs in a way that makes sense. It's about finding a balance between head and heart, understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses, and creating a space where they both feel heard and valued.
Sounds like open communication, patience, and empathy are key. Now let's talk about their creative potential. We often associate INTPs with logic and analysis, but our sources say they have a creative spark too.
Right. Their creativity might show up differently, but they definitely have this knack for coming up with innovative ideas and approaching things from unconventional angles.
So it's a more introspective, thought-driven kind of creativity.
Exactly. One source says their imagination is like a palette that they use to paint with the colors of innovation. They're great at conceiving new possibilities, exploring different perspectives, and challenging conventional thinking.
Because they question everything and think outside the box, they're naturally good at creative problem solving and innovation. So maybe not the most flamboyant artists, but they bring this unique mix of logic and imagination to their creative work.
Exactly. Think of them as architects of ideas, building these intricate mental models and exploring new frontiers of thought. But our sources suggest that their creative potential can be held back by self-doubt and their dislike of social conventions.
That's interesting. So they're great at generating ideas, but they might struggle with actually bringing them to life.
Yeah, their need for logical consistency can sometimes make them overthink things. They get stuck in analysis paralysis, they second-guess themselves, question their ideas, and have a hard time turning those abstract thoughts into concrete actions.
I can see how that would be a hurdle. So what kind of environment would be best for their creative work?
They do best in environments where intellectual curiosity is valued, where people are encouraged to experiment, and where individuality is celebrated. Places where they can get constructive feedback without feeling, stifled.
It's about finding that sweet spot where their analytical minds can combine with their creative impulses. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on one last thing that both sources emphasize: the importance of personal growth and self-awareness for INTPs.
Ah, yes, that ongoing journey of self-discovery can be really rewarding for them.
One article says that INTPs, even though they love logic and objectivity, can benefit from exploring their emotional side and becoming more empathetic. How can they do that?
Well, their dominant function, introverted thinking, always puts reason first. But they need to realize that emotions are a big part of human interaction. Learning to recognize and express their own feelings and understand what other people need emotionally can really improve their relationships and their well-being.
So even if emotions don't always make sense logically, they're still important.
Exactly. It's about broadening their understanding of the human experience, going beyond just pure logic and embracing the complexity of emotions. The sources also talk about how INTPs can be detached and struggle to connect with the concrete world. They get so caught up in their thoughts that they lose touch with the practicalities of daily life.
It's like they're living in their heads, not really paying attention to the everyday things that ground most people.
Right, and that disconnect can create problems with things like organization, time management, even basic self-care.
So how can they bridge that gap between all the abstract thinking and the demands of everyday life.
Developing practical skills, creating routines, and paying attention to their physical needs. Those things can help them create a more balanced and fulfilling life. It's about combining their intellectual strengths with a grounded awareness of their physical and emotional selves.
It's about finding that harmony between the mind and the body. It's the abstract and the concrete.
Precisely. And this journey of personal growth, even though it takes effort and introspection, can really lead to a richer, more meaningful life for the INTP.
We've covered a lot today, exploring the fascinating world of the INTP personality from different angles.
It's been an enlightening deep dive into the mind of the thinker, uncovering those complexities and nuances that make this personality type so unique and interesting.
I agree. We've explored their defining characteristics, their strengths and weaknesses, their approach to knowledge and creativity, their social interactions, and the importance of personal growth. This has given our listeners a good foundation for understanding the INTP personality even better.
It's an invitation to go deeper, observe the people around us with this newfound awareness, and appreciate how much each person contributes to the human experience.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Yeah, it's really amazing what you can learn when when you take the time to really try to understand someone else's point of view.
For sure. Now, I want to change gears a bit and talk about something else the sources bring up, which is the creative potential of INTPs. It might seem kind of surprising, right? Because we usually associate them with logic and analysis.
Yeah, you'd think so. But they actually can be quite creative.
Yeah.
Just in their own way. It might not be as, outwardly expressive as other types, but it's there.
So how does that creativity show itself in the INTP personality?
Well, one source describes their imagination as as a palette that they paint with the colors of innovation, which I thought was really interesting. They're great at coming up with new ideas and exploring different angles, different perspectives. They challenge conventional thinking. They're often the ones who come up with the most innovative solutions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because they question everything, right? And think outside the box. It's almost like their minds are just wired for innovation.
You could say that, but it's not always easy for them. The sources also say that INTPs can struggle with self-doubt, and they don't like social conventions.
So they might have these amazing ideas, but then have trouble actually making them happen.
Yeah, exactly. Because they need everything to be logically consistent. They can sometimes overthink things and get stuck in this analysis paralysis. They might second guess themselves, question their own ideas, and then it becomes hard to translate those abstract thoughts into concrete actions.
It's like their own inner critic is holding them back. So what can INTPs do to kind of overcome that?
I think finding the right environment is really important for them. They need a space where people value intellectual curiosity, where it's okay to experiment, where being an individual is celebrated, and where they can get constructive feedback without feeling, shut down.
So it's about that balance, right? Between structure and freedom, support, and autonomy.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment where their analytical minds can work together with their creative impulses. And that's where those, groundbreaking discoveries and innovative solutions come from.
I like that. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier, which is the importance of personal growth and self-awareness for INTPs.
Right. That's really crucial for them. The sources really emphasize that they need to explore their emotional side, even though it might not be easy for them.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive since they're all about logic and being objective. But why is that considered so important?
Well, their dominant function, which is introverted thinking, always prioritizes reason over emotion. But they need to understand that emotions play a big role in how we interact with each other and in our own well-being. Learning to recognize and express their own feelings and to understand what other people need emotionally can really make a difference in their relationships and in their overall happiness.
So even if emotions don't always make sense logically, they're still valid.
Exactly. It's about expanding their understanding of what it means to be human, going beyond just pure logic and embracing the complexity of emotions. The sources also point out that INTPs can be a bit detached, and they sometimes struggle to connect with the concrete world. They can get so caught up in their thoughts that they kind of lose touch with the practicalities of everyday life.
Yeah, like they're living in their own heads, not really paying attention to all those little details that keep most people grounded.
Right. And that disconnect can lead to problems in areas like organization, managing their time, even taking care of themselves.
So how can they bridge that gap
Mm.
between all that intellectual stuff and the demands of, just daily life.
Well, developing practical skills can help. Creating routines, paying attention to their physical needs, those things can help them live a more balanced life, a more fulfilling life. It's about combining their intellectual strengths with a more grounded awareness of their physical and emotional selves.
It's about that harmony, right, between the mind and the body,
Yep.
the abstract and the concrete.
Exactly. And this journey of personal growth, it might take some effort, some introspection, but it can ultimately lead to a much richer, more meaningful life for the INTP.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, exploring the world of the INTP personality. We've looked at their defining characteristics, their strengths and weaknesses, how they approach knowledge and creativity, their social interactions, and the importance of personal growth.
It's been really insightful, I think, shedding light on all the layers of this complex and intriguing personality type.
Yeah, I agree. We've definitely gained a deeper understanding of the INTP mind, and I hope this deep dive has given our listeners a good foundation to build on.
It's an invitation to keep exploring, really, to observe the people around us with this new awareness, and to appreciate what each person brings to the world, no matter what their personality type is.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we all bring something different to the table, right? And understanding each other's personalities can help us appreciate those differences.
Absolutely. Speaking of unique perspectives, I want to explore something else the sources talk about, which
Yeah.
is how INTPs approach relationships.
Yeah, relationships with INTPs, they can be pretty interesting, with that mix of logic and emotion.
One source describes them as fiercely independent, but also capable of deep loyalty and affection. They really value authenticity and intellectual connection.
Yeah, they're not looking for something superficial, that's for sure. They want a genuine connection with someone who gets them,
Mhm.
who understands their way of thinking, and who appreciates them for who they are.
But their reserved nature, their preference for logic over emotion, that can create some challenges, right?
Yeah.
How do they navigate the often messy world of relationships?
It can be tough. They might have trouble expressing their feelings openly, and all the emotional stuff that comes up in relationships, it can be frustrating for them.
So patience and understanding are important for both the INTP and their partner.
Absolutely. Their partners need to realize that when they approach things logically, it's not because they don't care, it's just how they process things.
It's about appreciating how they see the world and learning to communicate with them in a way that works for them.
Exactly. Clear communication, honesty, and a willingness to meet each other halfway. Those things are essential for building a strong relationship with an INTP.
Sounds rewarding, but
Yeah.
maybe a little challenging too. Now let's look at one last thing that the sources emphasize: the potential for personal growth and self-discovery in INTPs.
Yeah, that's a big one for them. INTPs can really thrive when they focus on personal growth. They're naturally curious and always want to learn and understand.
One source talks about how important it is for them to explore their emotional side and develop more empathy, which might seem a little strange since they're all about logic and objectivity. But why is it so important?
Well, even though their dominant function is introverted thinking, which puts reason first, they can't ignore the fact that emotions are a huge part of human interaction and a big part of their own well-being, too. So learning to recognize and express their own feelings and understanding what other people need emotionally, that can really improve their relationships and make them happier overall.
So it's like, even if emotions don't make sense logically, they still matter.
Right. It's about broadening their understanding of the human experience, not just focusing on logic, but embracing all that complexity that comes with emotions. And the sources also talk about how INTPs can be detached sometimes. They have a hard time connecting with the concrete world. They get so caught up in their thoughts that they lose touch with the everyday stuff.
Yeah, it's like they're living in their heads, not really paying attention to all the little details that keep most people grounded.
Exactly. And that can create problems for them, like with organization, time management, even taking care of themselves.
So how can they bridge that gap between all the intellectual stuff and the demands of everyday life?
Learning practical skills can help. Things like creating routines and paying attention to their physical needs. Those things can help them find more balance and make their lives more fulfilling. It's about integrating their intellectual strengths with a grounded awareness of their physical and emotional selves.
It's about finding that harmony between the mind and the body, The abstract and the concrete.
Exactly. And that journey of personal growth, it might take some effort, some introspection, but it can lead to a much richer, more meaningful life for the INTP.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today exploring the fascinating world of the INTP personality. We've talked about their defining characteristics, their strengths and weaknesses, how they approach knowledge and relationships, their creative potential, and that important journey of personal growth.
Yeah, it's been a really great deep dive. I feel like we've peeled back some layers of this complex and intriguing personality type.
I agree. And while we've only scratched the surface, I think we've given our listeners a solid foundation for understanding INTPs.
It's a starting point, an invitation to look at the people around us with fresh eyes, appreciate what everyone brings to the table, and to remember that even the most logical minds can be full of emotion, creativity, and a desire to grow.
What a wonderful way to sum up our exploration of the INTP personality. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep those minds engaged and those perspectives open.